What's going on? This Theo Gremminger, player profiler, back at it. We're talking about NFL free agency, and I'm going to give you NFL free agency's early winners and losers, fantasy football risers and fantasy football fallers. This was about the wildest early free agency period that we have ever seen for fantasy football. There were a number of players that moved teams that are going to impact how we draft in 2024, how our redraft rosters look, how our dynasty rosters look, and how our best ball rosters look. Anytime a door opens in the NFL, another door closes. Anytime a player is signed to get touches, it's going to affect another player on the team, whether that's a positive or it's a negative. But I'm going to give you 6 winners and I'm going to give you 6 losers and also a bonus loser who is not a free agent, but someone who was affected by this free agency period. And when we start out at the top and we talk about free agency winners, we got to start with Saquon Barkley. Saquon Barkley leaves the New York Giants for the Philadelphia Eagles, a massive, massive signing. He is probably the biggest dynasty mover, and he is also the biggest redraft mover. Saquon is going to find himself, when it's all said and done, being drafted somewhere at the 1-2 turn in redraft leagues. If he would have stayed in New York, he would have been probably drafted closer to the 2-3 turn. That's how big a significant move this one is. One of the league's best talents at the running back position goes to one of the best offenses in football. We can poke holes at Barkley's target ceiling with this signing. Jalen Hurts is never going to be somebody who is going to pepper his running backs with a ton of targets out of the backfield. And we can also kind of point holes at the fact that Jalen Hurts is really, really good running the football, and he's really, really good around the goal line. He could be a potential touchdown vulture in certain games this season. But boy, oh boy, does the pie grow larger in Philadelphia for Saquon Barkley. The touchdown opportunities for him in this offense are going to be immense. And when we look at Saquon Barkley's entire NFL career, this is by far the best offense that he has ever played in as a pro. Philadelphia really has it all. They've got the quarterback in Jalen Hurts. They have elite wide receivers in A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith. They have a very good tight end in Dallas Goedert. They have strong offensive linemen. And now they get Saquon Barkley. This is a scary offense for Kellen Moore to work with in year one. What do I think the ceiling is for Saquon Barkley? I think we could see a wild 15 touchdown season out of him this year. I don't think that's out of the question. We could also see him break off his fair share of longer runs next to a rushing threat like Hurts. This is as exciting a free agent signing at the running back position that we've seen in years, maybe ever. The narrative of staying in the same division with 2 games a year against his old New York Giants team, this will be must-see TV for fantasy football managers. Did somebody say Saquon Barkley revenge games? We always love a revenge game narrative, and we get 2 of them next year, especially with Tiki Barber and some people in the New York media not so happy with this move. So Saquon is definitely at the top. And we'll stick at the running back position with another free agency winner, and that's Josh Jacobs. Jacobs goes from the Las Vegas Raiders to the NFC to the Green Bay Packers. He's making that Lambeau leap a bunch of times this season, would be my prediction, because Josh Jacobs lands on an ascending offense. Last year, we saw Green Bay have great success in Jordan Love's first season as a full-time signal caller with a bunch of first-year and second-year pass catchers surrounding him. So Jacobs lands on an ascending offense that's really improving leaps and bounds. We saw it this year with how Green Bay did for about 7 quarters in the NFC playoffs. He gets to play alongside Jordan Love, who gave you top 5 quarterback production last year in 2023. Jacobs has been one of fantasy football's most consistent producers at the running back position, and he has never finished lower than running back 18 in PPR points per game at his position in any season in his career. He has an immediate pathway to giving you an RB1 season. He should return to his 50-plus reception production that we saw him have in 21 and 2022. Last year, sort of stylistically in Vegas, Jacobs was not really used quite as much as a pass catcher out of the backfield as he was in the previous 2 seasons. But we've seen him have back-to-back 50-plus reception years in 2021 and 2022. He had that special season where he led the NFL in rushing yards all but 2 seasons ago. So we know that's coming. That's in Josh Jacobs' outcomes. Now he gets to play in a better offense in Green Bay with a better quarterback than he would have in Vegas. Vegas this year signs Gardner Minshew, and they could draft a young quarterback. So instead of having those 2 guys as his quarterback, Jacobs gets to play alongside Jordan Love. Again, the receiving upside is there. We saw how they used Aaron Jones out of the backfield as a receiver. Josh Jacobs sort of does it all. And they re-signed A.J. Dillon, and we all know that A.J. Dillon has been somewhat of a disappointing player throughout his career for fantasy. Dillon is really signing on to be the backup running back. Jacobs is the clear-cut starter. He's going to get a ton of volume. He's going to be very, very fantasy-friendly this season. Love the Josh Jacobs Green Bay sign. And let's stay in the NFC North with another free agent winner, and that's DeAndre Swift. Swift lands in Chicago, and they made him one of the highest-paid running backs in the entire NFL. 3 years, $24 million for DeAndre Swift. Got to remember, DeAndre Swift is only 25 years old. I think that's part of the appeal for Chicago. They're probably going to draft a quarterback at the 1 with Caleb Williams. There's some rumors they could trade down. I don't see it happening. All of their offseason moves are indicative of putting talent around a rookie signal caller. DeAndre Swift signing. They've also traded for Keenan Allen. But getting back to Swift, 25 years old, joins the offense which we think is going to be led by Caleb Williams. And last year in Philly, DeAndre Swift ran for over 1,000 yards for the first time in his career. But his targets dipped to a career low 49. This was a player that when he was drafted out of Georgia and when he played for Detroit, he was known as a two-way back, a back that could kill you as a receiver out of the backfield and also be effective as a runner. Last year, we saw the running aspect, but the targets dipped to 49 in Philly. So this move gives Swift a chance to regain his work in the passing game that he showed early in his career in Detroit. We got to remember, DeAndre Swift had 62 receptions in 2021, and I think that he's going to return to multiple seasons of 50-plus catches with a chance of going to 60-plus catches this year. No free agent running back gained as much of an ADP bump as DeAndre Swift did. Saquon Barkley was already being drafted in the second round. Josh Jacobs has moved up slightly in ADP, but DeAndre Swift was being drafted as a running back 3. I think when it's all said and done, this is a player that's going to be drafted at the 4 or 5 turn in redraft PPR leagues when we get into the late summer. Exciting move for DeAndre Swift. And another unbelievably exciting move was Kirk Cousins being moved to the Atlanta Falcons as a free agent signing. But we're not talking about Kirk Cousins. Kirk Cousins, we know what he's going to be in fantasy. This is going to be a player that's going to be drafted as a QB2 that gives you a QB1 upside, but not the sort of player that's going to break fantasy. Cousins can throw for a bunch of touchdown passes, a bunch of yards, lacks that rushing upside to really give you that incredible season. But what Kirk Cousins has done throughout his career is elevate players around him, whether it was Adam Thielen, whether it was Stephon Diggs, whether it was Justin Jefferson, and whether it was TJ Hawkinson early last season. Players thrive in a Kirk Cousins-led offense. And the 2 Atlanta Falcons that are going to thrive a ton, we know Bijan Robinson's going to eat. But Drake London and Kyle Pitts both take huge steps forward in terms of how we need to view them heading into 2024. Both of these players were extremely highly drafted players, both top 10 picks in the NFL draft when they came out. Both of these players are still incredibly young. No NFL offense is going to look more different in 2024 than Atlanta. And these two guys are going to be the biggest beneficiaries. Kirk Cousins, we have to remember, was leading the NFL in touchdown passes last year when he tore his Achilles in week 8. So now Drake London will have the best quarterback play of his entire career by a very wide margin. Again, he was the 8th overall pick in the 2022 NFL draft, only 22 years old. London has displayed immense talent, but he has had frustrating, inconsistent fantasy usage. We have no love for Arthur Smith over here at Player Profiler, and what he did with Drake London was a big reason why. The days of Drake London and you looking at your fantasy roster and saying, why was Drake London only targeted a few times? Those days are long gone. Kirk Cousins is going to target Drake London a ton. Drake London can finish as a wide receiver 1 this season in his third season in his career. And when we look at what Kirk Cousins has done, he's had 6 wide receiver 24, so wide receiver 2 or better finishes with his teammates since 2018, 6 of them. He even had one season where Stephon Diggs and Adam Thielen both finished as wide receiver 1s. He's been a great driver for that. And when we look with what Atlanta did in the secondary moves in free agency, they signed Darnell Mooney and they traded for Rondale Moore. Both of those players are going to be on the field a ton, but neither of those players is going to take targets away from Drake London. So if Atlanta would have stood pat at 8 overall in the NFL draft and drafted like a Rome Odunze, we could have said, okay, this caps Drake London. But the fact that it's Mooney and Rondale Moore, Drake London is going to dominate the targets next year in Atlanta. And when we get to Kyle Pitts, we've actually seen Kyle Pitts play with a semi-competent quarterback at one point in his career. When Kyle Pitts was a rookie, also a top 10 pick, just like Drake London, when Kyle Pitts was a rookie, he had 68 receptions and 1,026 receiving yards as a rookie attached with Matt Ryan. Now, it's been sort of all downhill for him since, with Arthur Smith, using him sporadically, making Kyle Pitts managers about the angriest ones in fantasy, whether it's dynasty, whether it's redraft. Drafting Kyle Pitts the last 2 seasons has not been good for your fantasy team. He really failed to deliver after his promising rookie season. This year, in his 4th season in his career, he has a chance to return to the sort of production that we saw from him in his rookie season. A top 5 tight end finish is in the cards this year, attached to Kirk Cousins. Both of these players gained a ton of value in a very short period of time, just simply by having improved quarterback play. And improved quarterback play can be an incredible driver for fantasy success. Last season, we saw Nico Collins go from way further down than Drake London would have been drafted at to finishing as a wide receiver 1 when he gets attached to CJ Stroud. We're going to see the same sort of effect with Kirk Cousins on Drake London and Kyle Pitts. Start drafting these guys on your best ball teams and make sure you have some in Dynasty. 2 other low-key big winners from free agency are Christian Kirk and Evan Engram. Calvin Ridley signs a massive contract with Tennessee, and Calvin Ridley was targeted 135 times last year, 130 plus times last year in Jacksonville. He was also targeted 25 times in the red zone. So Calvin Ridley leaves Jacksonville, and he is replaced by Gabe Davis. Now, Gabe Davis can do some of the same things Calvin Ridley can do. I think Gabe Davis is low-key a winner as well, and I think Davis can also absorb the 25 red zone targets Calvin Ridley received. I think Davis could be a similar yards per reception player to Calvin Ridley, the 13.4 yards per reception Calvin Ridley had last year. But again, 136 targets last year for Calvin Ridley. Gabe Davis is not going to be targeted at that level. Christian Kirk and Evan Engram are now solidified in the pecking order for what we're going to see in Jacksonville this season. They could still draft a wide receiver, but the Gabe Davis signing makes it a little less pressure on them to do that in the first round. Evan Engram led all tight ends in targets last year with 143. He finished as tight end 2 in PPR scoring. Both of those are in his wheelhouse for this year. He has a chance to hit 140, at least 135 targets again. Evan Engram at tight end 9 on Underdog right now is a steal. And Evan Engram is a player that dynasty managers can also find as a huge value right now. Now, Christian Kirk had 133 targets 2 seasons ago, got injured for part of last year. Look for Christian Kirk to return to that same sort of 130-ish targets. Look for Christian Kirk to be a wide receiver 2. Look for Evan Engram to be a top 5 tight end this year. Both of these players, major winners from a player moving on in free agency like Calvin Ridley. Now, the last player we got to talk about who's a winner was not signed as quickly as Josh Jacobs, Saquon Barkley, and DeAndre Swift, but his signing is going to be impactful next year, and that's Derrick Henry. This is one where the Ravens tried to trade for Henry last year near the trade deadline. Henry was linked to Baltimore all offseason long as a probable Ravens free agent target. The sports books were telling us Derrick Henry was going to be a Raven. Derrick Henry is going to be a Raven. And while this signing is sort of anticlimactic, boy, is it exciting. Derrick Henry led the NFL in rushing attempts over the past 2 seasons in back-to-back years, and he scored 25 rushing touchdowns in the process. He has been one of fantasy football's most productive running backs over the past 6 seasons. He is 13th all-time in NFL history with 90 rushing touchdowns, and he is in great shape to go over 100 rushing touchdowns this season. He gets to finish his career attached to the best quarterback he's ever played with in Lamar Jackson. And, you know, much like the Saquon signing, there's people that can kind of poke holes in this. They'll say Lamar Jackson is going to get his fair share of rushing touchdowns, but Henry should thrive in Baltimore. And when we look at Baltimore, Gus Edwards signed with the Los Angeles Chargers, but Gus Edwards had only 198 carries in this offense last year, and Gus Edwards scored 13 rushing touchdowns. So Derrick Henry stepping into that role, he is going to have more carries than Gus Edwards, and he certainly has potential for more rushing touchdowns. The last time that we saw a veteran player with past fantasy success move to Baltimore as a running back move to Baltimore, it was Mark Ingram in 2019, and Mark Ingram finished that season with 15 touchdowns. I think Derrick Henry, that's in his wheelhouse, and Derrick Henry at age 30 has a chance to lead the NFL in rushing touchdowns this season. Baltimore was one of the highest scoring teams in football last year on a points per game basis. Derrick Henry makes them even more dangerous. Now, it's not as much fun to talk about the losers as it is the winners, but there's some players who lost some significant fantasy value, and we're going to start with Ramondre Stevenson. This was already going to be a transition offense. New England has a new head coach. They have a new offensive coordinator in Alex Van Pelt, but we were looking at Stevenson as a guy who could return some value, and underdog drafters were certainly betting on him, but there was hope that he could return to his 2022 production. Major decline in 2023. Certainly missed a little time with injuries, but wasn't the same last year as he was in 2022. 2022, Ramondre Stevenson had a huge breakout in his second year in the league, and he did so by being incredibly effective as a receiver out of the backfield. He's rose up to RB19 in these early underdog best ball drafts. So drafters were sort of betting on a return. And he's the only Patriot the drafters have been betting on. Everybody else is pushed way, way down. It's an offense that we have a lot of question marks about. And expect that running back 19 number on underdog to dip down steadily. And I think Ramondre Stevenson ends up being outside of RB2 land. He'll be something like a high-end RB3. And one of the main reasons we need to have him go down in terms of our projections is New England went out and signed Antonio Gibson, and they're really excited about this signing. And Antonio Gibson, throughout his NFL career, has caught the football at a very high level. So you get a player like Gibson, who was a third-round draft pick when he was drafted, a very athletic player, and only 25 years old, who's caught 172 passes in a 4-year NFL career. Gibson last year had his highest catch total of any season in his career. He had 48 receptions in Washington last year, and he's going to get utilized. This is now a split backfield where both players are capable of being pass catchers out of the backfield, but they signed Gibson, who's been somewhat of a specialist with this. This is a committee, and whether Mondre is a 60% in this committee, 55, 65 even, it's still going to be a committee, and those high-value touches, the running back receptions out of the backfield, those are going to be capped now for Stevenson. He has a capped target ceiling, and this makes him a free agency loser. Another player who we got to talk about being a free agency loser, and this one hurts me. I've been talking about this guy as a breakout all offseason, and that's Tyjae Spears. Tyjae Spears had steamed up incredibly high on Underdog. He was being pushed up into RB17 overall in these early best ball drafts. So drafters were betting on him being a high-end RB2. This is the perceived heir apparent to Derrick Henry and a guy that showed us his receiving ability as a rookie. He had 50-plus receptions as a rookie, and this is a player whose path was sort of similar to a James Cook or a Rachaad White. Day 2 selections in the NFL draft who took huge leaps forward in their second season in the league. So Derrick Henry left, but Derrick Henry was replaced by Tony Pollard. And Tennessee seems pretty excited about this Tony Pollard signing. And it's almost like I think Spears could have potentially had a higher ceiling with Henry, and he certainly would have as a receiver. But now he's got to contend with Pollard, and Pollard is a capable back of catching the ball out of the backfield. Pollard could catch 50 passes this year. And it, again, much like Ramondre Stevenson, it indicates somewhat of a split, and it indicates another back who can catch the football. So barring a Pollard injury, Spears is the kind of guy that you're going to be really happy to have on your roster, because obviously if Pollard went down, Spears is an incredibly talented player. But he goes from being a guy who's going to be an every week starter for you on your dynasty or your redraft roster to a guy that is somewhat of a committee back who's now fighting for targets and rushing attempts with another back on his roster that the team just signed. And add to that, Tyjae Spears also has Calvin Ridley being added to the roster as another capable pass catcher. So Spears is definitely a loser. Another loser here at the running back position, Brian Robinson. And the reason for this, Austin Eckler signed in Washington. And Austin Eckler certainly showed some signs of decline last year, but Eckler can still catch the football at a high level. And Robinson last year finished as RB21, a little bit of a surprise by how high he finished in terms of the running back production. And it wasn't because he was such an efficient runner. He only had 3.9 yards per carry, but he was able to give himself such production as a receiver. He caught 36 passes, and he had 4 receiving touchdowns. So this was a guy entering year 3 that we thought could take a step forward with those receiving totals. When you sign a guy like Austin Eckler, it certainly is going to cap Brian Robinson's ceiling. So Brian Robinson is going to need to be a much more efficient runner, or he's going to have to run for a lot more touchdowns. Both of those are big asks. So Antonio Gibson moves on, but they replace him with another running back who catches the football even better than Antonio Gibson has over the years, and by a considerable margin. I don't think Austin Eckler signs with Washington without some sort of a promise that he might be the featured back there. So Robinson goes from being a guy who was a Ron Rivera favorite. They certainly they gave him the running attempts over Antonio Gibson. This is a guy that Rivera seemed to really, really like. Now you have Dan Quinn in town with Cliff Kingsbury running the offense, and they immediately go and they sign Austin Eckler. I'm going to look for Brian Robinson's fantasy production to see a decline in 2024. And we talked about how the Atlanta pass catchers were big winners from free agency. Some losers here are players that we love talent-wise, but now have quarterback question marks, and that's the Minnesota Vikings pass catchers. And we're talking about a couple of facts that we know in fantasy. Justin Jefferson is one of the best offensive players in the NFL, period. That's a fact. TJ Hawkinson is one of the better pass catching tight ends in football. That's a fact. And Jordan Addison had one of the best rookie seasons in Minnesota history. That's another fact. All of those facts remain. But Minnesota now lacks stability at the quarterback position. They signed Sam Darnold as something of a stopgap or a backup quarterback. Darnold could start next year, or he could be a bridge quarterback for a rookie, or he could be a guy that gets beaten out by a rookie in the preseason. And there's no question that Minnesota is going to be a significant player trying to get a J.J. McCarthy, a Jaden Daniels, or a Drake May. They made a move today to trade for Houston's first-round pick, seemingly to move up with 2 first-round picks to dangle at one of these teams to move back. Their general manager, Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, he has his work cut out for him because as much as Minnesota wants J.J. McCarthy, Jaden Daniels, and Drake May, there's a lot of teams that want those 3 guys. So they have the 2 first-round picks, but they have no second-round pick. They have no third-round pick. So they might have to move their 2025 first along with those 2 first-round picks to put themselves in a position to get a Daniels, a May, or McCarthy. And they may not get that. I also think they could be in play for a Michael Penix. Any way you cut it, Minnesota pass catchers, you have to take them down slightly. And I don't think it's going to be Justin Jefferson. Justin Jefferson's too good. I think Justin Jefferson remains a top 5 receiver in the NFL, no matter who he's playing with. He's just too good. But when you talk about the secondary options, the lesser quarterbacks are going to have trouble supporting Jordan Addison remaining like a wide receiver 2. I think you have to treat him a little bit more in redraft and best ball as a very talented wide receiver 3 with a weird quarterback situation. TJ Hawkinson was already a guy that was going to be injured to start the season. Now he returns with lesser quarterback play. Another question mark. So Minnesota pass catchers, they definitely take a hit. And another pass catcher who takes a hit is DeAndre Hopkins. And Hopkins had a very good season last year, but now Tennessee goes out and signs Calvin Ridley to a mega deal. So Hopkins was the clear-cut top target in Tennessee last year, and now he becomes a little bit of a question mark. And it's not a question mark that we think DeAndre Hopkins lost talent, because DeAndre Hopkins is a very talented player. But when you pay somebody like Calvin Ridley this much money, you're not signing him to be like the wide receiver 2 next to DeAndre Hopkins. And you're not signing him to be a co-wide receiver 1 with D-Hops. Calvin Ridley's the new wide receiver 1 in Tennessee. This is a new head coach, and they have a new philosophy on offense. Obviously, we saw with the Pollard move, going from Henry to Pollard, and having a Pollard and Spears in the backfield, 2 guys can catch the ball, putting this much money into Calvin Ridley, the Tennessee passing volume is going to go up. But they are going to use Calvin Ridley a lot. And Hopkins now will have to contend for targets. So we talked about the running backs. They're going to pass to the running backs more. Derrick Henry was on the field a lot last year. That was certainly not part of his game. But Pollard and Spears will be passed to. Now you have Calvin Ridley, who's going to be used a ton in the passing game. And Hopkins now has target competition, and he probably goes to number 2 in the target pecking order behind Calvin Ridley. I think Calvin Ridley is still going to get his 130 targets in Tennessee. So right now, DeAndre Hopkins is 31 years old and looks to be a slight free agency loser. And we talked about Tyjae Spears losing value, and we also talked about Brian Robinson losing value, but certainly 2 other guys who lost value were Austin Eckler and Tony Pollard. Tony Pollard, there was a thought that Dallas was going to go and re-sign Tony Pollard. So instead of re-signing with an offense that, he had a disappointing year last year, but he still finished as a strong RB2. He would have been treated as an RB2 again in fantasy if he would have re-signed with Dallas. And his competition in Dallas was Rico Dowdle behind him. Not a bad player, but certainly not the talent that Tyjae Spears is. So Pollard's definitely a loser when he leaves Dallas and goes to Tennessee. Also a lesser offense in Tennessee, despite with what they want to do stylistically. Going from Dak Prescott down to Will Levis is a downgrade at the quarterback spot. Don't get it twisted. And Austin Eckler, that's another loser here because he goes from playing in Los Angeles with Justin Herbert, a quarterback who we know peppers the running back with targets, and Austin Eckler had seemingly no one behind him that was a real challenge to him. Even when Austin Eckler was playing poorly last year, guys like Kelly, guys like Spiller were unable to take touches away from him. They still relied on Eckler when he was playing poorly in the back half of the season. So he gets a quarterback downgrade in Washington, and he has more backfield competition in Brian Robinson, a player that finished as an RB2 last year in year 2. Both of these guys lose value. And as much as I love Jaden Daniels as a potential Washington Commanders signal caller, like Jaden Daniels is not necessarily going to step in and say, I'm going to target Austin Eckler. I think that that's going to be a more diverse offense where Jaden Daniels is going to be looking downfield and also getting his fair share of running attempts with his great scrambling ability. So projecting Jaden Daniels to be the quarterback for Washington stylistically is definitely a downgrade from Herbert as well. And the final person that we're going to talk about that lost some value is not a free agent, but it's Justin Fields. This has been a sort of roller coaster ride. If you have Justin Fields on your early best ball rosters, or you have Justin Fields on your dynasty teams, this has been a tough one. Everything Chicago is doing indicates to me that they're putting Caleb Williams in a position to succeed. They go and they get Keenan Allen. They signed DeAndre Swift for all this money. Justin Fields is most likely going to get traded, and the potential landing spots are closing. The top landing spot always was Atlanta. For months, we've speculated that Justin Fields could be an Atlanta Falcon. He's from Georgia. He played at Georgia before Ohio State. Returning to Atlanta with Drake London, Bijan Robinson, Kyle Pitts would not have gotten better than that for him. That door closed. They signed Kirk Cousins. Then we had a little bit of hope that the Pittsburgh Steelers, we didn't love the Arthur Smith signing for Pittsburgh, but we do love Mike Tomlin and Justin Fields going to a organization who understands what they're doing, like Pittsburgh, would have been a win for him as a second spot in his career. But Pittsburgh gets Russell Wilson. Then we talked about Las Vegas, where Justin Fields could have stepped in, gotten attached to Devontae Adams, Jacoby Myers, and perhaps Josh Jacobs as a free agent signing re-signs with Vegas. That door closed. Vegas signed Gardner Minshew. And even another place where there was a little bit of speculation that Justin Fields could get traded to was the Seattle Seahawks. New coaching staff, Geno Smith as a locked-in starter, but not somebody that looks like he's got a stranglehold on the position, for the next 5 years. That would have been a spot where you could have said, okay, Justin Fields can go to Seattle and potentially compete for this job. They went and they traded for Sam Howell. So free agency has not been kind to Justin Fields. It's going to be very, very interesting to see how this situation ends with him and what team he is playing on. Certainly the best outcome for him would be Chicago trading the number one pick and rolling with Justin Fields. I don't think that's going to happen. So he's sort of in no man's land with what team is Justin Fields going to quarterback this year. Now, there's a couple of teams out there that I think are going to try to figure it out in the NFL draft that could potentially swing and miss and then create sort of a secondary market for Justin Fields. But right now, we don't know who those teams are. I hope this video was good for you, and I hope you got a lot out of it. I hope that if you're a dynasty manager, some of these players that were winners are on your roster, and I hope that not too many of your guys were losers. Same thing with best ball early drafters. I hope we didn't talk about any of your guys being nuked. Stick with us here, Player Profiler, all offseason long. I'm going to be dropping videos like this pretty regularly. Check out some of my rookie ones that are available right here on Player Profiler YouTube. Check out all of my podcasts, and my written work is found at playerprofiler.com. I wrote an article covering the same winners and losers. So if you don't like videos and you want to read, check that one out. Have a lot of articles on the woodwork, not only about this free agents class, but also about some dynasty trades and also about this 2024 rookie class. Have a great weekend and stick with us all offseason here at Player Profiler. We got you covered.